Hi, I'm ChrisLody and welcome to the SONICWARE Liven XFM tutorial. The SONICWARE Liven XFM is a portable groove box based around FM synthesis with powerful morphing features. It also has features like a 4-track sequencer, FX, an LFO, filters, multiple playback modes, line-in, sync and MIDI, and the ability to deep edit sounds using an overlay. In this video tutorial I'll be giving an overview of all the different features with a few audio examples along the way, but it's mainly meant to be used alongside the PDF manual that you can find on SONICWARE's website. So let's get stuck in. So let's start by taking a quick look at the physical construction of the XFM. We've got 16 knobs across here, we've got 2 rows of 16 buttons and then 27 keys. Over here on the top left we've got our power supply input. Optionally you can use the battery compartment on the back, which takes 6 AA's. Our power switch, our display which gives us feedback, sync in and out for compatible units like Korg Volkers, DIN MIDI in and out. We've got line in and out with a headphone socket. So like I say, the knobs are mostly used for sound editing, but we also have an effects section here, BPM and volume control, and then a value control which is an encoder, which usage depends on where we are in the system. We've got another row of buttons below with our transport control and track selections, shift and function buttons to access extra features. We've got 16 buttons with LEDs above, which are used to enter step and note information, as well as changing a few other shift parameters. And then on our keys at the bottom we play in our sounds using these, and also we've got another set of shift features below which gets us into the system and to be able to edit all sorts of deeper things like MIDI assignments and that kind of thing. And then we've also got the edit section, which is also accessed through a shift, which is where we use an overlay to edit the core FM sounds within the unit. So to get started, we're either going to insert our power supply cable into our power supply socket or insert batteries in the rear panel. We're going to either insert a pair of headphones into the headphone socket, or in this case I'm going to go out through the line out so I can get a clean recording. And then we hold our power button down for a few seconds and it will come on. And the first thing it's going to display is the name of the default pattern that loads, and then we can press play to play and stop that pattern. By default it will play through the internal speaker, which we can change the volume using the volume knob, which will also change the headphone and line out outputs. We can turn the speaker off by going into the menu down here, which involves using these 2 buttons, so I might as well explain these now. Holding function will enable us to access things that are written below the buttons, whereas holding shift enables us to access the lowercase lettering below each knob. So in this case we hold function and we press that button and that mutes the speaker, so now it'll only play through the line-out socket. We can alter the headphone gain in a similar way, which won't affect the overall volume, just the volume from here. By tapping that we can scroll through normal, soft and loud, and then press function and gain again to exit. So as we play our pattern we can alter the tempo. We also have a global tempo option here, which I'll explain in a second. So if we press play, that's going to change the pattern tempo, which is saved in the pattern, whereas if we shift to our global tempo, that's going to change the tempo of the entire device, and we hold shift and turn the knob to access global tempo. If we want to lock the shift button in place so that we don't have to keep holding it down, we can hold function and press shift, and now every knob we turn will alter these lower settings, and then we just press function again. Shift again to exit. Over here on the right we have our pattern button. If we tap this once we can pick a new pattern by using the steps here. So if we tap number 7 for example, we're going to load this one, which is one of the default built-in patterns. If we tap it again though, we can see these also line up with have bank written between them. There are 8 different banks to choose from. Only bank number 1 has got presets in when you get the device. We can also double tap the pattern button and it will turn yellow. This puts us into pattern chain mode, so that we can punch in a whole bunch of different patterns and they will play through one after the other, which is a great way to chain patterns together to make songs. If we now look at these buttons, we can see they're lit up different colours. This tells us where we are in our pattern on the particular track that we've got selected. So track 1, for example, it only uses 16 steps, so one track page button is lit, whereas track 2 has multiple pages. So as this plays, these buttons will change colour depending on which page we are in. Like that. Over here on the last button is our knob latch feature, which if we hold the function button we see is lit red, we can turn it on and off. That means that if we load a pattern and, for example, one of the knobs is turned all the way down and saved in the memory and our knob is all the way up, it will require moving all the way down to catch where that saved position is, whereas if we turn it off, we'll just immediately edit a pattern or a saved memory as soon as we turn it. There's a great video over on the SONICWARE YouTube that explains exactly how this works, which I'd recommend you check out. We've briefly discussed what patterns are, but let's go into that in a little bit more detail and see what's actually contained within a pattern. We've got our pattern 7 loaded up here from the factory presets, which plays like this. Over here we've got 4 separate track buttons, so each pattern contains 4 tracks that each contain their own notes and sounds. Each section that's in pale blue is saved separately across 4 different tracks. So as we play, we're playing 4 separate tracks. If we hold function and press the track buttons, we can mute them. So we've got track 1 selected here, that's red, and that's playing this sort of kick snare combination. As we go through, we can select and unmute to add different elements. Like that. And we've got a 4-track song built up there. To show in a little bit more detail about what exactly a pattern contains, and then the deeper levels, I've made a little diagram up, so I'll show that now. So this diagram is a slightly simplified version of what we hear when we press play. The output is affected by our volume and our global settings, but most of what we're hearing is the contents of a pattern, which is shown by this rectangle. Each pattern contains 4 separate tracks and an effects unit which is global to the pattern. Each track contains its own notes and note lengths, voice settings, etc. Its synth settings. So they're all independent of each other, but they all play in sync. Each track can read up to 2 memory locations for sound memories. So these are saved separately to the patterns. They then morph together using interpolation in real time and are read by the track. So each track is reading 2 sound memories and converting them into a single sound to play. So in total, a pattern is looking, or reading rather, at 8 memory locations for sounds simultaneously. Right, so let's start building something from scratch. If we press pattern, we can scroll over to bank 2, press pattern number 1, which will be empty by default. Don't worry if it's not. If you want to erase a current pattern, you can just clear the pattern by holding clear and pressing pattern. Alternatively, you can clear tracks separately by holding clear and pressing a track button, and it will prompt you whether you want to clear the notes from the pattern or the sound from the pattern, and this will revert them back to their current saved state in the memory. So the first synth engine we're going to look at is the library mode, which is the simplest. If we look here beneath these 4 knobs, we can see we've got a table of words. At the bottom is library, so as we select different synth engines, we scroll through this list and the function on these 4 knobs will change. So if we hold function and press synth, X-Lab is the default one, scroll down to library. So here you can see this knob is bank and this knob is sound. So the sounds in the library are organised into 32 different banks with 16 sounds in each. So as we go through, we've got different leads and keys, sounds and pads and strings, and this will select from the selections within those banks. So if we stick to the default one, which is XFM, as we go through, play lots of different FM sounds. So these are just playing straight from the sound memories without altering them at all. But if we pick something like, let's go with this sort of pad sound, there's a little bit of shaping you can use. There's the attack control here, which will either shorten or lengthen how quickly the sound starts. And we can also change the tone, which is, for those who know what it is, it's the amount of feedback that's being used. But in layman's terms, that just sort of softens the sound a bit, which is quite useful. So sticking with that sound we just selected, I've turned down the attack, so it's nice and quick. The easiest way to get notes into the sequencer is just to hold a step on the sequencer and play in some notes. And then as we play back, they'll play back in that order in the correct time. If we want to clear notes, we just hold clear and press our steps and they're gone. Alternatively, we can use the step record function. So if we press record and select a step, we can press a note, and then wait for us to select another step. We can use a tied note function, which is here. If that's on, we can hold a note, and that will record a long note, like that. Alternatively, we can use the auto step function with the step record. So if this is on and we press record, it will step along automatically. So it's going to move along a step each time, every time we record a note. So let's clear those again. You'll notice I've been playing on the keyboard down here. We can set the octave for the keyboard by pressing these buttons, and they will change colour depending on which octave we're in, which will also be recorded. Also, we can set the velocity for the sound. This usually means volume. It depends on how the sound's been programmed. Some won't respond to velocity at all. I've just selected a new sound here, that's super saw. If we hold shift and turn down this knob here, which has got velocity written underneath it, the tone and the volume of the sound will change. So by default it's set to 100. If we want a softer sound, we can turn that down and then play in different notes, and that will create different sounds we play for expression. Another way to get notes into our sequencer is to use the real-time recording mode. We do this by pressing record and then pressing play. This will just play the track in a loop, and when we can play things in real time. It's really useful to turn on the metronome if you've just got a blank pattern though. So we hold function and press metro. We can turn up the volume of the metronome from here, which will play. There's also a pre-count function, which will count a number of beats before we start recording or playing. So that's useful to help us get in time before we hit record. So for example, there we go, we've recorded our chords in real time. So if we want to change the length of our track pattern, we can do this by holding function and pressing length. By default it's 16 steps long, which is just a single page. We can go anywhere from 16 all the way up to 64. You'll notice these buttons have now lit up because we're longer than 16, all the way down to 1. So let's make it 32 just to show you what it sounds like. So now when we play, we're going to go to the second page, which is empty. Let's turn that metronome off again. We can also change the note value for the selected track. This essentially scales the length of the track up and down depending on the note length selected. So we've got lots of different options here. We can go a 30-second note, which will be twice as fast. Or we can select dotted and triplet notes. So the further we scroll to the right, the faster it will become, and the further to the left is slower. We can also transpose our pattern by holding function and pressing transpose. This is in the number of semitones, so we can select a new value and the whole thing will move up or down depending on what we've selected. We can change the pan and level per track by holding shift and turning these two knobs. This will move it around in the stereo field, and this will change the relative volume, like that. Default is 63. So using what we just talked about, I'm going to create a quick kick drum pattern for our song. I've just cleared the pattern again, so we're back to normal. Function and let's select library mode. I'm going to pick XFM 2 bank this time, the first sound in which is a kick drum. So I'll hold this and turn velocity up. Let's program our first kick drum in at 100. Place it there and then turn it down to maybe 70. And that will make the other kick drums a little bit softer so we can hear the start of our bar. And we've got a nice kick drum pattern going. To save, we can hold function and press pattern. And that will prompt us to select a bank and pattern to save to, and we press OK, and that's done. So that's now saved in that pattern. I'll return to this kick drum pattern a bit later and I'll show you how to spice things up with another feature. So for track 2 of our song, let's select track 2 and press Function and Synth, and X-LFO is selected by default, so that's what we'll look at next. This is where we have to start looking at morphing. As with the library mode, the first 2 knobs are concerned with selecting bank and sounds. Apart from this time, we have to hold Shift to change the bank on each of the sounds, like this. And just turning them without holding Shift will select the sounds within each bank. So this X-LFO uses 2 FM sounds and it morphs between them. So if we pick, for example, let's go for Digi Bass on this side, and we'll leave this one with organ. And as we play, all the way to the left is going to be this sound. All the way to the right is going to be this sound that we've chosen, and places in between will be a combination of the 2. So down here, this is starting to be affected by the organ sound, and then this is the organ sound affected by Digibass. And you'll hear there's a bit of a switch in the middle. That's because we've got pitch and envelope locking turned on, which is this. So if we hold Shift and turn these, we can see we've got no locking, we've got envelope locking, pitch locking, and pitch and envelope locking. Envelope is how a sound changes over time, and we can lock the envelope to sound 1 on this side of the knob and to sound 2 on this side of the knob, for example, and then the same with the pitches of each of the operators can be locked to their respective sounds. If we turn off pitch locking completely, we're going to get a much wilder experience. Everything is allowed to freely interpolate no matter where they sit. They don't have to be matching in pitch. You can get some really dissonant and strange sounds using this. The colour is related to the pitch locking. So the default colour is set to red. This means that all the switches take place in the centre. As we select different colours, the switching can take place at various different places. They're spread out across the range of the knob. It's quite a difficult thing to put into words, even though I don't really fully understand what all the different colours do. The best thing to do is just to experiment with it and see how it affects your morphing. Just by ear, you're going to make interesting choices. The tone that we can access from Shift and turning this 4th knob is the same as the tone in the library mode, in that it lowers all the feedback from all the operators simultaneously. So it's great for tone shaping. So I've just stopped recording for a minute and I fiddled around with the settings in the X-LFO, and I found a nice little lead sound for us and programmed in a bit of a melody, which sounds like this. So this sound uses the Supersaw and the Crystal, which are both in the XFM1 bank. We've got our setting about here somewhere, so that is Supersaw, and that is Crystal. So the 2 combined sound like that. So if we wanted to save this sound out now and play it through our library mode, what we can do is we can hold Function and press Capture, and then pick a bank and sound to save it to, and that will save that sound out separately. It will no longer be a combination of 2 sounds, but it will just be that one sound as it is. So this is a great way to create your own sounds on the XFM if you're not interested in delving into the really deep part of FM synthesis. You can just combine sounds and save them and build up a library of sounds that way. So as our melody plays, you might hear the tails on the end sound a little bit long. There's something we can do about that. We've got a release and gate control on the surface here. That will shorten or lengthen the release times on the preset sounds. So if we turn it up, we're going to get nice long sounds. Down below here, we're going to get nice short punchy sounds. And within the sequencer, as the notes play, we can shorten them even further using this control. So we get nice little snappy staccato sounds. So let's leave it maybe about 63. Now so far we've been playing in polyphonic mode, which means we can play chords, but the XFM is capable of lots of other different voice playback modes. So if we hold Function and press Mode, we can see we're in poly. If we switch to mono, we just get one note at once. If we hold Function and press Adjust, we can adjust the glide time between these notes, which is going to affect our melody that we just programmed in. There's also a legato mode, which does the same thing, but it doesn't re-trigger our volume envelopes. So it's less snappy, more smooth. And then also we've got our arpeggio after that, which is going to arpeggiate our chords. If we press adjust on here, we've got lots of different types of arpeggio that we can use. So let's just try a few. There's lots of different combinations you can try to get lots of different arpeggios going. So if we want to get a bit of vibrato going, we can use the LFO. Now that's these here. This is our LFO controls. There's also a control for the filter, but we'll come back to that. So if we turn up our pitch control a bit, and there's our vibrato. We can mess with the rate and the amount as much as we want. If we want vibrato just to be on certain notes, we can use the parameter lock function to do that, which is something I'm talking about in detail later. So there's lots of different shapes on the LFO. We've got a sine, square, triangle, saw, which is going to be this kind of thing, and then we've got reverse saw, random, which is great for that kind of retro computer sort of sound. These are much more unusual, strange LFO shapes, log and reverse log, and then we're back to sine. Also in the LFO controls we've got an LFO delay, so this is going to enable us to stop the LFO from starting immediately as soon as the note plays. So this is with it off, and then the higher we turn this up, the longer it's going to be just a normal note that doesn't have any vibrato on it. So let's just turn those down for now. So while we're talking about sort of adding pitched elements, we can also use sweep to change the pitch of our sound. Sweep is activated here. If we hold function and press either the octave or up or down buttons, we can sweep up or down. Then we change our range and our curve with these two. Up to 2 octaves either way, so if you do that up, let's go back to range. Like that. And these are saved per note, so if we were to add this into our sequence, it won't affect the other notes we've already played in. So let's just add in a quick note. I can't remember what key this is in, so it's not going to sound nice. Let's just go there and punch it. Actually, that wasn't too bad. So that swept note isn't going to affect the ones we've already put into our sequence, so we can add lots of different combinations of swept notes and other pitched elements to our sequence. So the sweep curve function gives us more options again. If we were to turn this from linear, this is just a straight line between pitches. We've got more options to add even more control over our pitch to our sound. So for the next track of our song, we're going to turn our attention to X form, which is the next synth mode. So if we pick track 3, hold function and press synth until we get X form. This time these two knobs are exactly the same as before. They select the two sounds and banks that we're going to morph together, but our morphing is controlled by these two knobs. I'll just turn these down to 0 because they do have a little bit of preset sound to them. I'm going to pick organ and supersaw to begin with, so immediately we're hearing the supersaw sound. This knob is going to control how quickly the morph is between the two sounds. So let's turn that up. We can hear the morph taking place over time. Whereas if we turn that down and turn this one up, this is going to switch from one sound to the other after the delay. So time is a linear transition between the two sounds, morphing all the settings together, whereas delay just switches immediately from one to the other. We also have the same pitch locking options here, so by default they will be on. If I turn them all off, again we're going to get some really wild sounds. And then this time we've got the same colour option, but it's on the shift on the knob 4. So we've got red through orange and all the other colours available to us. So this time I've created a bass sound using a combination of this flanged bass sound and a trumpet, which sounds like this. So this control is set to the kind of a middling kind of setting, and it's controlling how long it takes to morph between those two sounds. And then I've written this bass line. If we play that in the context of a track, it's perhaps a little bit bright, so we can take the top off with a filter. So we control the filter with a cutoff and resonance knob here, and then the depth and time control the envelope, how long the envelope takes to cycle. The actual shape of the envelope is determined by which filter we choose. So if we hold function and press filter, it's off by default, and then the first one is going to be low pass with a rise and fall shape, and the next one along is a low pass with a fall, and then a low pass with a rise. As we go through, we've got high pass with the same shapes, band pass with the same shapes. So these are different types of filter with different types of envelope. So if we stick to the low pass filter with a rise and fall, we can then... The cutoff is going to control those upper harmonics. If we turn up our resonance, that's going to add a bit of a peak into our cutoff and emphasize harmonics. I think we're all kind of familiar with that sound. So if we turn it down to about 25 again, and then if we turn up our depth and time, the time is going to determine how long it takes to cycle through that rise and fall, and the depth is going to determine the amount and direction in which that is influencing the cutoff. The depth controller is also bipolar, so it can go down and up as well as up and down. So using these controls, we can get an amazing amount of control over our sound. With a combination of morphing, FM synthesis and filters, we can do an enormous amount. If we turn down our depth to 0 again and time to 0, we can control the filter with the LFO as well, using this control. Which also gives us lots of control. So for our fourth track, we're going to use X-LFO. You might have already guessed what this is going to do, but let's pick track 4, cycle through synth to X-LFO, and the rate and shape are going to determine the morphing this time using a dedicated LFO. If we turn down the speed to begin with, so those two sounds that are in there by default are being morphed backwards and forwards by the LFO. We can change the shape by to just turning the shape knob. So that's sine by default. And we've got the same choices we have in the main LFO. This is completely separate to the main LFO, so this will run at its own speed. Triangle again, saw, reverse saw, random, and logarithmic shapes. We have the same pitch locking and colour to choose from also, so we can create some really weird stuff. Lots of weird shifting sounds. This time I've created a pad sound. I've loaded up this string bank, and I've chosen Ensemble 1 and Ensemble 2. These are quite similar to each other, so the shifting between them with the LFO is going to be quite subtle. So if you choose quite similar sounds, you can get some nice shifting tones, good for strings and that kind of thing. I've added a little bit of pitch LFO in as well, just to get a little bit of movement, but I've not programmed anything into the sequencer yet. If we go change our length down to the same as the bass line, I'll show you how to put in chords nice and easily. We can press record, pick our starting step, play our chord, hold the notes, and then press the step we want to finish on, and that's going to paste a chord in for that whole section, like that. Then if we go into our next page, we can choose another chord, and our next page, and then our last page. That's going to be 4 chords playing through, matching the length of our song. There we go. I'm just going to save that quickly so I don't lose it. And then, so that's pad sounds quite nice, but it would sound much nicer if we had a bit of reverb on, because it's just dry at the moment. So let's go to our effects types. Our type button is here. If we cycle through to reverb, there's quite a lot of different, actually let's just talk about what these are. So we've got chorus, flanger, delay, an insert delay, bit crusher, a reverb, a mono reverb, distortion, a low pass filter, high pass filter, isolation filter, and a tremolo. So quite a lot to choose from. So that's still going to be dry at the moment. We need to turn up our effects send, which is here. And then we can adjust our settings for our reverb sound here. That track might be a little bit loud now, so we'll turn that down a bit to compensate. And on mute. So there we go, that's how we set up FX Synth. Another feature is the parameter lock feature, and this is basically another term for automation. This means we can automate the knobs as our track plays. We can automate anything within the blue section. That includes the upper and lowercase words, so that means we can alter the morphing controls, the sounds that we've selected, LFO rates, everything. We can do all of these at once. There's no restrictions on the number we can use. The parameter lock button is here. When it's green, it means the feature is on. When it's yellow, that means it's in sound locking mode, but that's a separate feature, so we'll come to that in a minute. And when it's off, then the feature is off. If we make it green, and then we can program precise amounts in for a start. So here, let's turn our attention to the bass line. And we're going to make the filter open all the way up on these 4 steps by holding the step and turning it. Turn it back down to an automated level, and then when we play, the filter is going to lift up on just these. If we're not happy with that, we can just hold clear and press the parameter lock button. If we want to record in real time, we'll hold function and press parameter lock, and then when we play and move this, that's going to record a value per step. So when we play back, we get lots of movement, so we can do this for all of these parameters. The sound locking feature is related, but it's just concerned with selecting sounds here. So if we turn our attention to our drum track that we programmed in earlier, that's not where it is, sorry, that track. We've just got our kick drum sound that we programmed in earlier. If we decide we want to add some hi-hats in, we could change this to yellow or orange, I should say, and select a hi-hat sound. We can then program that in on all the steps. And then turn our control back to our kick, but this will remember that we programmed in hi-hat sounds. So it's a great way to build up rhythms. You can add other sounds in, all the melodic sounds or bass sounds. So that's a really easy way to add in different sounds into your patterns without having to automate these sound and bank controls. Another great feature is here, which is our dice feature. This will lower the probability that our notes will trigger. So as we turn it down, there will be less and less likely to trigger. So it's a great way to get some generative things going. It's really powerful in conjunction with the parameter locks. Let's just turn that back up to 100%. So if we change this back to green, I'm going to program in the kicks to be 100%, and I'm going to program our hi-hats in to be less likely to trigger. So to do that, I'm going to press Shift and Function and Shift to hold the Shift button. I'm going to turn these up, program these in 100%. Steps 1, 5, where are we? 9 and 13. And then I'm going to turn these down to maybe 50 something percent. Let's just sort of choose it. So our kicks are always triggering, but our hi-hats are less likely to trigger. let's talk about our real-time sequencer modes. We've got random and stutter over here. If we hold function and press random, that turns on random for the selected track, which in this case is the melody. And then we need to select our random step amount, and that determines which sections it's chopped up into. So this will be chopped into 4 steps, and then it will be randomly choosing those as we go along. So if we listen to this, it's randomly picking parts of the melodies play. We can do that on all tracks separately. Our stutter mode allows us to hold a step in a track and it will repeat that step until we let go for real-time performance. So if we do that on the drums, for example, turn on stutter. We can get some great real-time performances with that. So one of the features we've not talked about yet is the swing feature. This will add a bit of shuffle to our rhythms. So I've programmed in a different hi-hat pattern here, which is just straight 16th hi-hat pattern. If we want to add a little bit of a shuffle to that, we can just turn up our swing control. So this can be done on a per track basis. It can also be automated per step, which adds a tremendous amount of rhythmic possibility. We've also got down here our copy and paste functions. These are to copy and paste tracks. These can be copied and pasted within a pattern or between patterns. And skipping forward, we have lots of different clock options in and out. These are best off detailed in the manual. And then MIDI channels again. We've got a channel per track in and out, and then a few other different channels for different functions, like which channel controls the entire device when it's connected to the computer, which is quite useful. So if we connect to a controller, we can play the different tracks without having to change channels by selecting, I think it's MIDI channel 6 by default. And then another MIDI menu. This allows us to change transmission of CC and change our MIDI out to a MIDI through, for example. And lots of other deeper features, which I'm not going to go into because they're really complicated. And then a data menu allows us to transfer patterns out of the device using SysX MIDI standard. And then we have our system menu, which has our main tuning control in it, and a battery type, which is helpful if you're using rechargeable batteries because it will determine when it gives you a battery warning. So if you're using nickel metal, select that one, or lithium. And then auto power determines how long it takes to turn itself off. I've got mine programmed to not do that at all. But if you want it to turn off after an hour or half an hour, then turn it on in here. And then lastly, line in determines the input gain here and whether we have it in mono or stereo. And the effects line in is set from this control here. So if we press this, we can determine how much of our line in from another device goes through the effects unit. So let's have a look at the edit mode. The edit mode is for deep editing the built-in library sounds, or we can create our own sounds from scratch. To access this, we hold function and press the button here, which is edit. And that will then prompt us to select a bank and sound to edit. There's 32 banks to select from. If you scroll left, you'll go into bank 32. And then these numbers here will select the sound we want to edit. If we decide at this point we don't want to be in edit mode, we can just press clear and we'll back out into pattern edit mode. Let's go back in again and let's select bank 32 and I'll select sound 1, which will be empty. So at this point when we press OK, this button will turn green, and that's telling us we're in edit mode because it is now page 1 when we put our overlay on. You can select between page 1 and page 2. They will lock, unlike the shift buttons in the pattern edit mode. Page 1 means we're editing the text in capital letters. When we're in page 2, we're editing the lowercase text that's round about orange. So there's a number of utility functions we have here. We can initialize our sound by pressing this button. That will wipe the sound completely. We can copy another sound in. This procedure works the same way as we just selected our sound for editing. So we can pick a sound that exists and edit that. We can export our current sound as MIDI from here for saving. We can edit the name of the sound by pressing this, and this will enable us to scroll through letter by letter, changing the name of the sound. If we press the OK button, which has save written above it, we'll be prompted to select a bank again to save our sound in. If we select one, we'll then again be prompted to name our sound. So the velocity and a few other functions have moved in the edit mode just to free up some controls. So velocity is here. That just informs the XFM what velocity our keys are being played at while we're editing our sound. We can change our voice mode here, which is the selection between monophonic, polyphonic, etc. And then on page 2, our adjust is here, and that is for glide between notes in legato and monophonic mode. And just as before in pattern edit mode, once we're into the sound edit mode and these buttons are no longer lit, these are our octave buttons. So as we select them, we'll change the octave that the keyboard's playing in. So to explain how the editing works, I really do need to explain a little bit how FM synthesis works as a process. It is an additive process, that meaning we start off with basic waveforms and we make them interact with each other or with themselves to create more harmonically rich sounds that change over time. The XFM is a 4-operator FM synth, as you can see from the diagram here. Each operator also has its own envelope, which means we can change the volume of it over time. The volume changes will determine how the tone also changes, depending on how these operators are interconnected with each other. On the XFM, we have the choice of having any operator interact with any other operator or itself, unlike on some FM synths where you have to choose between different algorithms which determine how these are connected together. That's not the case here. We can just do as we please, which is great. That's really helpful on a sound design front because we don't have to plan ahead too much how everything is going to work at the end. We can just dive in and start connecting things. So by default, when we load up an initialized patch, we'll find that all our operators are set to sine. That's just a pure tone like this. If we then feed the output of one into another, we'll change its output. I will explain this in more detail, but if, for example, we select operator 2 and feed it into operator 1, our tone will change. So if we set up an amount that one operator will affect another, and then that operator changes over time, then that sound will change over time. So that's what our envelopes are for. Additionally, if we feed an operator into itself, we can change the tone there too. So if I select operator 1, this determines how much 1 is sent into 1. So we can go all the way from 0, which is sine, which is the pure tone. We can go into positive feedback, which is producing a saw-like waveform. And then right at the top we have noise. Also on the XFM we have negative feedback, which if we drop down to 0 again to our sine, if we go backwards we're going to create square-like waveforms. So without even introducing any FM, we've got a great range of sounds we can sculpt just from using feedback. So the way the overlay works on the XFM is we have a grey section here. That is our quick edit. That enables us to access a few functions on all 4 operators at once. So if we're in page 1, we're changing the mixer levels of each of the operators. So if we drop this down, you can hear that fades away. So these are determining how much of the 4 operators are getting to the output. At the moment, they're all set to the same pitch and tone, so they're going to sound the same. Then we have our ratio and fine frequency settings. So if we turn operator 1 back up again, then we can change our pitch of our operator in coarse and fine steps, like that. So these settings are duplicated across the front panel for all 4 operators. So we have coarse and fine for the other 3 operators. If we go into page 2, we have feedback for each of the 4 operators. So as I said before, if we go into negative amounts, we get square tones. Positive amounts, we get saw and noise, like this. And then below we have a level for each of the operators. That's an internal level rather than the level that's been sent to the output. So that will determine the volume and the amount that they interact with each other. Like that. And then we have a detune, which is an even finer amount of pitch control. Great for getting things to rub against each other and a bit more sort of chorusy sounds. So below our quick edit section, we have a deep edit section. The way this works is we select one of our operators or our mixer page, and then we select a function that we want to edit, say operator 1 ratio here. Then we use our value knob to change it by large amounts, and we can use our value encoder to change it by small amounts, like that. Our operator select buttons also work as mutes, so if we tap the operator button again, we're going to turn it off, and as we scroll through the different ones we can see this is now orange, indicating that it's off. And then we just need to press it again to switch it back on. So as mentioned, our mixer tab gives us access to the amounts that each of the operators is going to be sending to the output. So as before, we've got our first operator is turned all the way up and our other ones are muted like that. This also gives us access to our global pitch envelope, which I'll detail a bit later. So as we go through the deep edit section, we'll find that our settings for each individual operator are identical, so I don't need to explain each one individually. So for example, if we're in operator 1 and I select its ratio amount, that's shown here. If I change that, go into operator 2, and that's its ratio amount. So as you can see, these two values are different. And that's the same for all of these settings across the bottom here. Each of those is individually controlling the settings for each individual operator. Going back to the beginning here, if we select operator 1 and then the receive level here. So receive level is the amount that an operator receives from another operator. If the receive button is the same number as the operator we've selected, that's then feedback. So as we mentioned before, our feedback amount can be set. If it is different to the operator selected, say number 2, so that is the amount operator 1 is receiving from operator 2. So that gets us our FM sounds. If we turn it up a minute actually and adjust the frequency of operator 2, we can hear how that affects the sound. So even though operator 2 isn't routed to the output, it affects operator 1 depending on its pitch settings and the amount set in the receive level. So let's just turn that receive level down a minute, and then we're back to a pure sine wave. So the same is also true of this number 3 here. This is the amount that operator 1 is receiving from operator 3 and the amount that operator 1 is receiving from operator 4. Moving along, we've got our ratio. So this is our pitch of operator 1. So at the moment when it's set to 1, that is our fundamental pitch, which matches the same as our keyboard note. If we go down from there, 0.5 is an octave below. So, and then 1 is our fundamental, 2 is an octave above, and then we start getting into harmonics. So if we switch on again a little bit of modulation from operator 2, and then alter operator 2's pitch, we can hear that we get clean results when we've got round numbers selected, but if we select a fine amount, we tend to get more atonal sounds. So that's worth bearing in mind. I'll just turn that modulation off again. Here again is our level. It's by default set to the middle. We can alter the overall level of our operators here. Again, that's an internal level that affects the volume of the operator and how much it affects the other ones. We've got a detune set in here, which again is the finest amount of pitch adjustment that we can make. Here we've got our velocity sensitivity. Now this, like all the other settings, is per operator. So we can determine how loud each operator will be depending on how hard our key strikes are or how high this velocity knob is turned up here. So by default, this won't do anything. If we turn up our velocity sensitivity to maximum, we're then going to find that velocity affects its volume. This not only determines the loudness of the sound, but depending on which operator it's set to, it can determine tone as well. So, for example, if an operator is set to use lots of modulation and also lots of velocity sensitivity. When we hit our key harder, it's going to introduce more and more harmonics. So just skipping over the envelope section for a minute, because I want to come back to that in more detail. We've got a volume scale section here on the end. If we press scale position, that's going to determine our center note for our scaling. Either side of that is the amount of scaling that will be introduced either side of that center note. So C4 is this C here. If I were to change the scaling on the right, at the moment there's no volume difference here. If we turn that up, this is going to remain the same, but this will be louder. And if I turn it down, it's going to be quieter. This is useful sometimes if we create a sound that sounds nice down the bottom end of the keyboard, but as we play up, maybe it sounds a little bit over modulated or a bit under modulated, a bit too much noise or a bit too mellow. We can adjust the volume of our operators and how much they interact with each other. So on the left, there's also the same for below the center note. And then in page 2, we have our curve settings. So we have a choice between linear and exponential for both left and right scaling. So we can determine the shape of that onset of changing volume also. Also on page 2, we have our fixed option. This enables us to fix the pitch of an operator. So by default, this is off. So we get the normal kind of pitch scale to key. We can turn fixed on. This then fixes the pitch of our operator in place. If we go back into ratio, we can then see our setting has changed to hertz. So we can change the value in hertz to an exact amount using the coarse and fine settings. And this is really useful for effects and percussion synthesis, for example. Then over here, if we press these two buttons together, we get to our algorithm selection. This is detailed in the manual. These are a preset way of routing the different operators together. Personally, I prefer to route them freely, but if you prefer the older way of doing things, go and check out the different algorithms in the manual. So going back to our envelope, if we select page 2 and then attack time here, these are all our times for our envelopes settings, and these are all our levels for our envelope settings above, which are on page 1. I'll show a diagram in a minute that shows details of how the envelope actually works. But for example, time, attack time, the longer that is, the longer it takes for the envelope to start. Release time is similar, but it's the other end. So we can soften the start and the end of our envelope, and then in between we can create a shape using the diagram that I'll show you in a minute. Again, we've got curves for these, so the up and down curves can be edited separately on page 2, but this time we've got a bit more detail to our settings. So 0 will be linear, and then minus and plus that will create different curve shapes in positive or negative directions, so we can create snappier envelopes or more sluggish ones. Timescale affects the whole envelope at once. If we're in page 1, we select timescale. The higher this value, the shorter the envelope will be, the higher we play up the keyboard. So with this turned all the way up, we can create a piano-like sound, for example, with very short notes at the top of the keyboard and longer notes at the bottom. So here's our envelope in more detail. It's an H-stage envelope. So here we have where our key is pressed, and this is our attack time, as we just discussed. Release our key here, and here is our release time. So our levels are set like this, with 127 being the maximum all the way at the top and 0 being all the way down the bottom. These can be above or below each other. This is just an example. So for example, this sustain level could be up here, or this decay level could be right down here, or the attack could be right at the bottom. So we can move these around freely as we want. This release level is kind of a special case. You wouldn't really use this on an audible operator. This is more to help maintain tone as a key is released. So on an operator that's been used to modulate an audible one, you might want to lift this right up so that it stays the same as the key's released. And this is how our times work. So we've got our attack time that we just showed and our release time here at the end. So the order is time and then level, time, level, time, level, time, level. So you want to be going to page 2 first, really, to set the time, and then page 1 to set where it gets to. And then that's true of the rest of the settings as you go through. So here on page 2 we have our pitch envelope setting, so it's off by default. If we turn this on, we're still not going to get anything because our pitch envelope hasn't been set up. We need to go into mixer to do this, so our levels are going to determine where the pitch lands as we go through. So for example, if we punch in some different values into the sustain level of the pitch envelope, that's going to determine where the pitch ends up. So it's on a per operator setting, on or off, but there is only one pitch envelope. So this is global across the patch. And here is our pitch envelope. This is similar to the volume envelope, apart from this time we can set our levels below 0. So up to 48 semitones this way, 0 being having no effect, and then minus 48 semitones this way. Time is the same, but level can be positive or negative, and that goes to the whole envelope. So, but again, of course, it's time and then level, time, level, time, level, time, level is the order that we need to think about when we're programming our sounds. So I think that's pretty much everything. If there's anything I missed, let me know in the comments below. If you've got any questions, I will do my best to answer them, or potentially make a longer video about a specific function. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks very much.